Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Ideally Podcast. This is your host, Alec Ogg, and thank you guys for being here. On this show, we are helping creatives with ADHD fulfill their potential and create the success they want by learning more about personal development and entrepreneurship. If you're tired of saying, well, ideally, I would own my own business and do this and that, then this is the show for you, because we're going to help you go from saying, well, ideally, to actually doing it. And what better person to have on as a guest than my personal business career coach, Jen Frank. Jen is an independent professional certified coach who has dedicated her practice to helping people achieve their goals, live their best lives, all the while being kind to themselves. I worked with Jen for the first time in 2017, and I was in a total career crisis and didn't know what to do next. And I can trace so much of the fulfillment I have in my life now back to realizations I had through working with her group coaching 4 years ago. So we'll go through a bunch of the exercises that she uses coaching people like me, and hopefully you guys can get a lot out of it. Get a little free career coaching here if you listen on. So I'm really excited to share all this stuff that changed my life with you. So thanks for being here, and let's do it. Jen, thank you so much for coming on, being the first episode back of the podcast.
I'm so excited to be here. Thanks, Alec.
Oh, I'm excited to have you here. I was just telling you, but I feel like a lot of the reason that I have a podcast and have built a podcast company is thanks to your help as my coach. So thank you. You're
welcome. I appreciate that. I remember the night we were in the career coaching group, and at one point, you had talked about podcast. And at one point, I just said, does everybody think Alex should do a podcast of his own? And every hand immediately went up. We were just so tired of you talking about not doing it because we knew you could do it. You had all the skills to do it. And it was such a good fit for your personality, too.
Yeah. And it's funny that I hadn't really ever connected those dots. And that's a testament to why coaching and group coaching can be so effective, because I would watch other people have these obvious things in front of them and be like, why can't you connect the dots and see it? It's so clear. And then to have that happen to me, I was like, oh, okay.
Now, we had nothing to do with you starting your own podcast company, though. That's all of your expertise and mastery. That's not us, but we'll take credit for moving you in the direction of your own podcast.
But hey, I know you had us do that exercise where you draw kind of with colors and stuff. And I remember just thinking about the idea of owning a podcast company and drawing that. And well, here we are now.
Yep.
So
how about that? First, it's a thought, right? And then it becomes a thing.
Yeah.
Love it.
And I hope we can talk a little bit about vision and stuff like that.
Sure.
All that stuff. So tell me a little bit about who you are and how you got into the world of coaching.
As a kid, I think I was a bit more creative, and left to my own devices, I probably would have gone to school for something like English or maybe one of the helping professions like nursing even. Except I didn't really like bodily fluids in the sight of blood. But, I had two parents who had been English majors, and they both said, oh, don't do that. You can't do anything with that. They wanted me to find something practical, and they kind of ingrained all these limiting beliefs in there for me that I didn't have to come up with them. They came right out of their mouths and became my beliefs too, right? That you had to find a safe job and you had to stay in it. I ended up with a business degree. I really didn't know a lot about careers. This was well before the internet, so you couldn't research careers easily, and fewer careers were even open to women at that time. You weren't really encouraged to do a lot of things that the boys were encouraged to do. And when I went to my guidance counselor for help, they put me through one of the earliest computer assessments where you answer a bunch of questions and it's supposed to spit out vocationally what you're supposed to do. And I got sanitation, and I got mortuary sciences. And here I was, this creative kid who loved poetry and writing and crafts and stuff. I was like, oh, I don't think that's for me. So I took my parents' advice. I got a business administration degree, and my first career was 10 years in information security, which was a terrible fit for me and my values, but I didn't understand that stuff then. Right. And you find a way to meet your values. So I went about my life and I did the best I could until I couldn't take that career anymore. I couldn't do it for one more day. There wasn't enough money to keep me in it. But I'd been volunteering a lot, and that was to meet my own values and what was important to me. And an organization came to me and they said, we'd like you to come and do fundraising for us. And we're going to offer you this great salary that's going to cut your pay in half. And I'm like, awesome. So I fretted about it a lot because I didn't know enough about myself, at least consciously, to know if it was going to be a good fit. And so, I really agonized over the decision, but it worked out. And I was never short on money. And I can't explain that. There was some kind of loaves and fishes thing that happened. And it was more aligned with my values and aligned with my strengths. And I excelled and I moved up and I spent 12 years in fundraising for the arts. And it was a great career. And then a voice came into my head again and said, I want to make an impact a different way. And so I went to an open house at a local university and I was looking at a master's in social work. And I was at this open house for about 10 minutes and I kind of had a panic attack. And I left. And I stayed there for like an hour through the program, but I was like, I don't want to do this. I knew I didn't want to go back to school again. I had an MBA. I knew I didn't want another degree. I couldn't take school anymore for that long. And I realized I don't want to work with sick people. I want to work with well people. So now what are my options? And I learned about coaching. And it took a while to actually move from learning about coaching to signing up to go to coaching school to becoming a coach. That had its own process with all of its own limiting beliefs involved in that and fears and things. But I went back to school and I became a coach. And so I've been coaching for 8 years now.
Wow. And yeah, I feel like coaching, even in the past 8 years, has grown exponentially. And so I guess when you were first starting, that term wasn't even being thrown around as much as it is now at all.
No, it's not something I could have said, when I graduated from college, would I become a coach? It was not a well understood field at all. And there was no public awareness really around coaching. Even when I said I was going to coaching school, my dad's like volleyball? Like, no, not volleyball.
And when you were kind of realizing you had to leave that job in information security that just was draining you, what did that look like and feel like in your personal life when you knew that day had come that I can't do this?
Yeah, it was really that. It wasn't necessarily clinical depression. It was more of that. When I told my boss I was quitting and I was going to go fundraise, she's like, she wanted to retain me. And she's like, what can I offer you? And I said, you don't have anything that you could give me. Right. So there wasn't enough money to make that job a fit for me. I was there was something in my soul that was just kind of slowly dying and wilting. And, it wasn't the right place for me to be. Yeah. And I was on the wrong path. And so, when we do that kind of thing, I think the universe course corrects us. It was fine while I was there and I was learning and I was making relationships and you always find your best fit even in the wrong career. But after a while, your best fit in your wrong career still doesn't feel good enough to let you stay. But I think once you're in enough pain like that, that's when the pain or the discomfort gets greater than the fear. And then you get more willing to take a risk and make a new choice.
Yeah.
And that's what I needed.
And did you have a mentor or a coach at that time that kind of guided you to values, or did you stumble onto that stuff, or did you learn that after the fact?
I think I learned about values earlier in life. But the way that a lot of people do values work is they give you a list or they tell you to make cards and they let you choose. And it's based on preferences. And so I kept choosing values that were my mom's values. So I kept choosing things around commitment and responsibility and hard work, which are all important to me, but they're not my core values. Yeah. So the way I do it through storytelling, and it gets at the heart of things. And so when I did it for the first time that it was useful and real to me was in my coaching program. And it's how they taught me to do values is how I do it with my clients now. And I remember I was paired up with somebody, and we did this in the third class. There was 50 classes or a large number of sessions, but it was our third class. And I was paired up with somebody, and I told a story about being in a poetry group that I used to write with. And I'd written a poem about it was called 40-something phone sex. And I got the best reaction to this poem. And that one story brought out a lot of my core values. And my core values had nothing to do with responsibility and commitment, right? They were all about belonging and self-expression and kindness and things like that. So yeah, I think that I had done my values earlier in my life, but because I was trying to please other people at that time, instead of being true to myself, I got a bad result. And I don't think that it hurt me in any way, but I don't think it helped me either.
And just for the listeners, if they've never kind of heard about the idea of values, because I don't think I had really thought about them much until I worked with you. I had always heard them as sort of corporate speak of like, these are our company values.
Right.
Like honesty, integrity. And it's like these hollow words that are so over diversity.
Excellence. Yes.
Yeah, exactly. They're almost like meaningless qualifiers now. But the way you had us do it is to think about those highlight moments in your life where you feel like you're kind of firing on all cylinders. And like one that came to mind to me was going to the Women's March in 2016, because I built these huge like anti-Trump signs. Gonna lose some listeners here. And I had painted them, and I was with my sister, and so I was having all these things about like creating and camaraderie and fun and good times and also learning and all those things. And then being able to actually realize those things and use those as a filter in life for kind of what's going to actually lead to more of those experiences was so eye-opening to me. Because there were certain things like learning that I'd never really thought about those as being part of my identity. But then once they were labeled with something like the Strengths Finder, I was like, oh, that is a huge part of what gets me through the day or whatever.
Yeah, yeah. And I think we know these things subconsciously, but it's different when you know them consciously and you can, bring them up or even, record them. And then when you have decisions to make, you have that, it's just advice to yourself, right? It's more data, more information. And then it becomes subjective or it becomes objective. Yeah, right. Okay. Becomes objective. And then you can really use that information to say, which direction should I go? Yeah.
So thinking about values leads me to think about purpose, which is a great thing to know if you're kind of an entrepreneur or anything like that. Do you know your purpose, and how do other people find theirs?
So I'm actually not a big believer in purpose or calling. I think it's a very small portion of the population that vocationally knows what they want to do from the time that they're little kids, right? That they feel called to become a doctor or a priest. I think that what I do with my work is I try and help people find work that feels purposeful to them. Because I think purpose gets tangled up for people with vocation, and then it becomes confusing because most of us don't necessarily have one vocational purpose. I have done purpose work with my own coach before, years and years ago, and he did this. It took 6 months, and we did this 4-part purpose, and it was great. But at the end of it, I'm holding this purpose, and it says things like, "I see beauty in dark places," and it's like that's really cool. And vocationally, doesn't really help you at all, right? So it was like, So, but in my 20s, I read every book on like, what's your purpose, what's your calling? And I don't think you're necessarily ready for it. Some of the purpose experts in the field, they don't work with people till after 35. So it's like, do you have to know your purpose to get more aligned with work that's purposeful for you? No, you really don't, because there's so much information just in your values and your strengths. Like there's other information that you can use without like knowing your one true purpose. Because most of us are going to have 5 to 7 careers in our lifetimes. And they say you'll have well over 12 jobs. So if you only had one purpose, then you're going to kind of settle in, I guess. And it's like, if I told you, Alec, like all you can do now the rest of your life is to run this podcast company, right? Wouldn't that feel constraining and not good?
Yeah. And it's funny because like this podcast company is the result of doing all those exercises. And even then, when I play out what do I want to be doing in 10 years, 5 years, even 1 year, I don't want to be pressing record for someone else's podcast because I think I have higher, skills than that. But Yeah. So even when you've landed in kind of your right lane, still, it's almost like the way we use purpose can almost limit you. Like I was an actor, a musician in Los Angeles, and I think I got so locked in from an early age that my purpose was to succeed in the entertainment business through either songwriting or comedy acting, that when it was like beating my head against the wall, trying to make those things work, it felt so relieving when I'm like, oh, well, like, you can get that same feeling by doing these other things that are so much more natural and fit with kind of the way you want your life to be.
Yeah.
I don't know if that makes sense.
Absolutely. If purpose makes you feel small, you're not doing it right.
Yeah.
It should be a really big umbrella for a lot of other things. I just don't think purpose is always as accessible as some of these other things are, like values and strengths that we have. And they can serve as just as well as guideposts for us. So do you have to know your purpose to find your right work? No.
I also think a lot of books say, like Think and Grow Rich is a classic kind of self-help business book. And it's like main tenet is to know your definite chief purpose in life. And I think when you read something like that, where they're like, all of the successful people have known their definite chief purpose in life, you know yours. And it's like, okay. And you kind of do that thing where you're more choosing a preference, or like, I think this is my purpose, ?
Right.
And it's not necessarily even motivating, because it almost feels like you just made it up.
Yeah.
And it's not really grounded in something real. How do you get there to actually find something that could be sort of quote unquote a purpose that actually you can kind of use to make decisions like values?
I think the first thing you have to do is to really be able to stay grounded in what feels good and right to you while keeping limiting beliefs at bay. Because the first thing you're going to do around purpose, probably, not everybody, but a lot of people, will be to please others, right? What would make my mom happy? I remember I was a little kid, really young, and I was at my grandmother's, and I was coloring on the floor. I had crayons and paper. I was coloring. And she was in the room, and she said, "What do you want to be when you grow up?" And I was probably 3 or 4. I mean, this is a really early memory for me. And I said, "An artist," because I was coloring at the time. I was a little kid, right? And she looked at me. She didn't say anything. She looked at me, and I said, "Or a nurse or a teacher." And then I got approval.
Wow.
Yeah. So this stuff gets programmed for us really early. And to be able to overcome that, especially as a teenager in high school trying to figure out what to go to college for, it's like, I don't know that you're ready to really throw off everybody else's expectations for you and declare your purpose. I also don't want people to get too locked into one purpose and that they don't leave any space for them to evolve and grow or change their mind, because then it makes it's so much of a bigger risk to go after your one true purpose if there are no other choices ever. It's like, oh, I have to go after this. I have to make this work, because if I don't, I have no other choices. And it's like, no, you have infinite options. Always. You have infinite options. And they're not good or bad. They're just neutral.
Yeah.
And so whichever ones, like, they seem to align with what, you do well and what really interests you and lights you up, and it's something that the world needs, it's like, yeah, go ahead and pursue that. And if you change your mind, that's okay. Whereas locking into one purpose or one thing, it's like, no, give yourself some space to make new choices later.
Yeah. I think where I do enjoy kind of the one thing commitment idea is that I came from a place where I would always have like, these are my screenwriting goals. These are my acting goals. These are my songwriting goals. These are my singing goals. And it's like sort of that our creative ADHD where you're always like excited by the variety and the newness of each thing. And so you kind of bop around, but you're sort of just building sideways. And like year after year, like, why am I not building anything really in life? And it's like, well, it's all been built, but it's all just a foot high,
Yeah.
And then kind of working with you, maybe unintentionally, but like that helped give me permission to commit to podcasting, which is weird. I know you probably didn't do that, but it really helped me to basically just kind of have a lane and be like, it's okay for me to just work on this thing and that when that feeling of wanting newness and variety comes, like, how can I just work that into the business I'm already doing? And it's been really helpful.
That makes a lot of sense, though. I'm a big believer you can have it all, but not at the same time.
Yeah.
So if there's something that means a lot to you and you want to be successful at it, yeah, you're going to have to put your energy there.
Yeah.
I believe you get out of it what you put into it. So that makes a lot of sense to me. But your one thing can change over time.
Yeah.
And we allow ourselves to do that. But while you're committed to that one thing, it's like, well, great, because that's going to make it more likely that it's successful. So I think there's room for those ideas to coexist together. Thinking
of your mom and how she kind of had these projecting these limiting beliefs on you, you taught me a lot about the Keirsey inventory test. Mm-hmm. It's a personality inventory test. You can probably describe it better than I can, but there's 4 general categories of an idealist, which you and I are, which is what gave me the idea for the name of this pod. And then there's guardians.
Right.
And I'm guessing your mom might have been a guardian.
Very much. My whole family's guardian.
Okay. And we'll describe them in a second. And then there's artisans, and mastermind? Rationals. Okay. So would you mind outlining those groups a little bit and maybe talk about how us idealists are a minority and the guardians are a majority and how society kind of skewed towards the views and priorities of the guardians?
Sure. So Keirsey temperament sorter is kind of like a souped up version of Myers-Briggs. And it's a temperament assessment, and temperament is the inborn part of your personality. And there's 4 main temperaments. Guardians are the largest group. It's 45% of the population. And they can be fairly traditional, and they're kind of our pillars of society, and they want to hold everybody up and keep society moving forward. And they're really dependable and reliable and all that great stuff that, I would have claimed as my values early on to make my mom proud. The next biggest group is Artisan, and Artisans are 30% of the population. And gosh, they're a lot of fun. There's a lot of entertainers and athletes mixed in there, but they are likely to work with their hands, and they have a lot of flair. Rationals are 10% of the population, and they're our scientists. They're very logical. And boy, they're good at the big picture. They're so good at strategy. A lot of us think we're good at strategy until we meet a rational, and then we're like, oh, that's what it looks like when you're good at strategy. Got it. And then you have idealists, and we're 15% of the population. And, we've got our head in the clouds, and we get told that. We care about potential and possibility. And those things really light us up. There's not an idealist out there that wouldn't like to go to Hogwarts. That would definitely be our school of choice. So it's a temperament that we have a lot of feelings.
Just break down crying as you say it.
Well, not even that. It's like we have good feelings too, but we have feelings. We have pre-feelings, right? My boyfriend recently was going to go on a trip, and I looked at him and I'm like, oh, I'm going to miss you. And he's like, but I'm right here. And I'm like, yeah, but I can pre-miss you before you go, because we have feelings about our feelings. So it's not just that idealists are more creative. It's that the things that we care about are, very empathy and kindness based. And we care about being genuine and authentic. And the things that drive us aren't necessarily the things that are driving other groups. So the things that drive guardians are more about being dependable and being of service out of duty and being respectable. And so we don't necessarily look like that, but we'll conform so other people will be happy, especially when we're younger. And so that's why I kind of adopted my parents' values, because it was a way for me to increase my sense of belonging and avoid conflict and keep harmony.
Yeah. What kind of jobs do guardians have in, what would be some cliche typical, if you had to reduce it, that a lot of guardians have?
Teachers, nurses, I would say general practitioner doctors, family doctors, firemen, policemen, definitely managers of all sorts in businesses.
Yeah. The only reason I ask is that I think a lot of those occupations that are those guardians, in the majority, they're almost the cliches of when you think about what job should I have. It's like those are all on the menu,
Yeah.
And I, like you, I probably took 50 employment, like what should I be when I grow up tests when I was kind of having an identity crisis before meeting you. And it's like nothing would ever pop up on the results that I actually wanted to do, you know?
Yeah.
And even if it was in kind of an artistic field, it didn't feel right. Like, okay, it says graphic designer, but like, I don't think I want to be a graphic designer. And so things like that. And I realized that I think those types of tests are almost built by and for the Guardian structure almost. And that one of the things in my Curacy, report said at like on one of the very last pages, it was like, you might find the most fulfillment in working for yourself and like starting your own thing. And I was like, oh, wow. And I think that's what gave me the confidence to become an entrepreneur, is almost seeing that in the report. And I just wanted to say that I think I love personality tests, but I think what helped me so much with that report is it almost gave me permission to be myself and feel what I was actually feeling. Because sometimes I feel like there was a day in school that I missed. Everybody learned something about how to be an adult that I missed. And I'm like, how do you want to, be a banker or something? Like, really?
Yeah.
But there's people that love that, you know? So I think I just enjoyed reading the results of that because it made me feel like I wasn't crazy.
Yeah. Yeah. I would have been voted least likely to have their own business. But idealists also don't seek to lead. There's never been an idealist president in this country. But if we care about something enough, or if we care about maybe the people enough, then we'll lead or we'll start our own business, right? And I wanted to do the work badly enough. And I knew that I was supposed to be doing that work. And at that point, it was like, oh, okay, then I'm going to be working for myself. So yeah, it's not something necessarily that comes natural, but when you find the right thing, you're willing to figure it out a little bit more than you might otherwise be.
Definitely. And the realization that I'm kind of almost completely unmotivated to do things that don't have that passion spark or greater potential or motivation behind it. And I was always like, why am I so miserable doing jobs that other people find totally fine, Yeah. And it's almost like, oh, there has to be that potential, the values alignment and things like that for me to not be completely miserable and feel like it's a waste of time.
Yeah. I agree with that. At the same time, for your entrepreneurs out there, I do want to say this idea that, do what you love and you'll never work a day in your life. It's like, yeah, you will. It's still work. It's still work. I love what I do and it's still work because you have to show up. And there's always some tasks you don't want to do that it's like, even if you hire out, like you can only hire out for so many things. So there will be tasks that you enjoy less that you'll probably still have to do, like file your quarterly taxes.
What?
Yeah, there's going to be stuff you're going to have to do that it might not, be a passion for you. But it'll be necessary. But I think as long as like you really enjoy about 80% of what you do, and then the 20% is like, okay, I got to do this other stuff. That's pretty good. It's that we don't want you in a life where like you only like about 20% of what you're doing and 80% is drudgery. It's like, oh, that's not great. That we can probably do better than that. But can we get you like 100% in your bliss all the time? No, like we don't live at the peak of the mountain, right? We live mostly on the way up and the way down. And so I just wanted to throw that in for the entrepreneurs out there who think that it's going to be bliss every second. It's going to be a lot of hard work and hustle.
I guess what I meant was that the mundane tasks become much more doable when they're tied to like this greater version of purpose. Like, oh, well, like if I could get this person's podcast to reach this many people, like that's exciting. So I'm willing to do this one editing task that isn't really my desire zone, but I know it's like connected to that. Yeah. Then things like taxes and things like that become almost, they tickle the learning itch where I'm like, okay, well, I want my business to succeed. I'm excited about that. So I can interpret these things that I wouldn't typically enjoy as learning to serve that greater thing. I guess it's sort of just reframing.
Absolutely. And it makes a difference when you're doing it for yourself than for a company or something.
Yeah.
I remember like early on, the money that I made, It wasn't a lot at all. And it was the best money though. It was my favorite money.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's funny that like going to the grocery store and getting a bunch of groceries and being like, a podcast bought all these groceries and everybody told me like podcasting can't make money or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
There's something super satisfying I'm not even like a rebellious person, but I really enjoy people being able to make money through kind of, I hate the word passion sort of, but through what they're passionate about and interested in, kind of finding their own path. And you're right that it's almost like better money somehow. It's satisfying.
It is. I agree.
Okay, so I have found in my adult life that the idea of habits has really helped me with this idea. I read a book called The Slight Edge, which was basically like, if you want results, do like little things each day that add up over time. So it's like, instead of checking Instagram for an hour every day, what does that look like in a year? If you've done 365 hours of checking Instagram, probably not much. What if you did just 10 minutes of meditating? What does your year look like with 3,650 minutes of meditating instead? You know, those little things, those little habits. And I think they really can kind of shape your outcomes if you play them out over time. And so do you have any habits or mantras or affirmations or anything that you use that you found helpful?
I find routines are really good for me. I can get in a routine and stay in it a long time. And then when I get out of it, it can be really difficult to get back in.
Yeah.
But so putting things on the calendar is a big deal for me, because otherwise I'll just book a bunch of clients and not think about it. So I know that at 10:30 on Tuesdays, I do yoga, whether that's online right now with my teacher or, you know, at my studio. And so when I know that that's like a rule, then I'll work around it. But sometimes I think we tend to put ourselves last. So a lot of my habits are kind of more for, what do I need right now? Like I would have told you that I don't have a ton of extra time I can't exercise every day. I don't have that kind of time. And then last year I broke my elbow. And it never occurred to me not to make the 3 hours a day to rehab this elbow, because I want that back. You know, I want that range of motion back. I want to go back to yoga, things like that. So it's amazing the habits we can suddenly build from scratch, and things that we definitely would have said, I can't do that. So, you know, it's what do you want badly enough, and what time are you willing to set aside for it? And first, right? If it's important, do it first, because if you leave everything for the end of the day, it doesn't happen.
Yeah.
So
willpower is like a non-renewable resource.
Yes. There's somebody out there saying it's renewable. I don't think it is, though. Your willpower gets tired. It's like you have to be emotionally connected to the thing that you want. If you're not, you're going to have a hard time kind of keeping that habit going. But I wouldn't say I have a ton of great habits. I understand like the neurological links and like how to make them and this and that, but it's usually more because I want something bad enough.
And I think it's funny, like you said, you never would have thought you'd be running your own business. Yeah. I'm the same way in that, like, I never would have thought I'd be attracted to the idea of routines or habits or even entrepreneurship or business. Like, if you would have asked me in college, I would have been like spit on the ground at the idea of someone studying business, because I was just like, that's so silly. Like having a LinkedIn, like, are you kidding me? But then realizing that, like having a business feels as creatively fulfilling in a lot of ways as making an album or something like that. And realizing that, it scratches that itch, and realizing that, like habits are kind of like journaling is actually really fun and fulfilling to me.
Yeah.
So things like that. But yeah, do you do any affirmations or mantras or anything like that?
Early on, I had some in my business. I had some mantras that were important to me, and one of them was when you start a business, everything feels really high stakes. Every client, right? And I knew I didn't want to put this energy out to other people that was grasping or needy. Like, I have to get you as a client, and so every day in the morning, I grounded myself in how can I serve. How can I serve? Before every meeting, I just kept saying that, how can I serve? Because that was important to me, and it would keep me out of that needy space because I didn't want to put out that grasping kind of energy. And the other thing when you first start a business is there's a lot of hustle and self-promotion, right? People are like, oh, self-promotion is gross. It's bad. It feels like a used car salesman. And it's like, no, it's just telling people what you do. That's all. Are they supposed to guess? Right?
Yeah.
So I had to go out a lot and network and hustle. There's a lot of hustle when you start a business. And my mantra was, I show the fuck up. That was my mantra. So
Nice.
I would go out to stuff. I would meet people. I always said, my goal when I would network was to show up and be awkward. And if I showed up, I hit my goal every time, right? And so I was out a lot, just meeting people and talking to people and getting the word out. Did everybody become a client? No. Did some of those people refer me? Yeah. And then, by year 3, all my work was referrals, and I didn't have to do that as much anymore. And now I get referrals from people I don't know. People are like, oh, well, this person referred me, and I don't know who that person is. So it's really interesting how that network does get, bigger and bigger, and some of the people in it you don't even know.
Yeah. Yeah. I feel like every time I show up, and a lot of times I think showing up for me means committing to go to like a conference or something where I'm like, ooh, like, do I have the $300 to book that conference ticket? I don't know. But then every time I do, it's like almost life-changing because of some talk I'll hear or someone I'll meet, and I'll be like, oh, like that's what I needed. That's what was missing. And I think that's a lot of what showing the fuck up looks like on my end. As an extrovert, even I have to remember that showing up is important because I love stuff like that. But you're introvert,
I'm an
quote
introvert.
unquote? Yeah.
Yep, I'm an introvert.
What's your Myers?
I'm an INFJ.
Okay.
So under Kiersey temperament disorder, I would be an idealist counselor.
And I'm the idealist champion.
Yes, unsinkable.
Which, do you think it means champion as in I'm a champion for others? Or champion as in like you just want to race?
You're a champion for yourself and for others.
Okay.
So you would, you want to facilitate good relationships with the people you know, but also between the people you know, and then your people and the world. So it's like, I want to buy the world a Coke. It's like that.
Wow, that really just summed me up. And I'm an ENFP if you guys need to connect the dots on what those labels are. But okay, cool. I love that. Show the fuck up.
Well, it's dark out, it's raining, and I'm going to go out to some hear somebody speak or, go to some community gathering of whatever. And it's like, I don't want to go.
Yeah.
And it's like, yeah, you just started a business. You got to go.
Yeah. Especially COVID has turned me into like an 80-year-old man where like at 8 p.m. I'm like, all right, time for bed.
Oh, yeah. Absolutely.
Put the tea on.
Yep.
Yeah. My girlfriend and I joke that like it was like dog years where every year of COVID was like 7 years.
Sounds right to me.
Yeah. So piggybacking off of that advice you just shared about showing up, what would you go back and maybe tell yourself starting out in terms of advice?
That anybody can do the entrepreneurial hustle. Like it's not like, oh, well, that person's extroverted and they have those gifts and they have this network. I started my business in a new town. I had moved to Memphis less than a year before I started my business. And not only did I start a business, but I started a business in something I'd never done before. And when I think about it now, I'm like, wow, that was really ballsy. I'm like, that's crazy. But anybody can do it. I was lucky I had fundraising skills. It wasn't my MBA that helped me. It was my fundraising skills. That if you're willing to go out and hustle and not take it personally, if not everybody becomes your client, yeah, you can do it too. And that idea that like self-promotion's gross or like if you're good, people will just magically know. It's like, no, they won't. Go ahead and tell them what you do and tell them what you can accomplish for them or help them accomplish. I think the big thing for me was to learn how to take care of myself in the midst of running a business. And still it can be hard for me. So I over time I figured out, I have to manage my energy, not my time. And that I was willing to take more risks and make a choice and commit to something if I knew that I was going to be kind to myself if I got something so-called wrong, right? That over time, I learned that if I let things just be choices that were neutral and I was allowed to make a choice, follow it until it didn't make sense anymore, and then make a new choice without berating myself for like being wrong or bad, that I was willing to move forward and take risks and make commitments and things like that. So I think learning to really be kind to myself in that way was important to me, that you can always make a new choice.
Yeah.
And that's what coaching is really about. It's about helping people see their options and to know that they're always a choice. And so that was something I needed to learn for myself. And I think that that's important advice for people. I think a lot of becoming an adult is kind of learning to reparent yourself and in the way that you needed to be parented all along.
Yeah.
And so I think being an entrepreneur is really a journey you go on in the relationship with yourself, which they say is your most important relationship, right? Because wherever you go, you're there with you. So yeah, just really learning how to take risks and be with myself and be kind to myself has been important. And I think that, yeah, anybody going on this journey, it's like plan to work on that.
They say that entrepreneurship is like a personal development heat box or whatever, or pressure cooker.
Yeah.
That's what I'm, heat box. What is that?
I'm not sure.
Yeah. I had COVID, and after COVID, my brain has been foggy, and I've been like, it's hard to pull certain words. So forgive me if I'm saying things like heat box. But where was I going with that? Oh, yeah, like it's just a personal development pressure cooker, because you can't brush mistakes or your personal shortcomings under the rug, because pretty much all of your results are more or less related to kind of either the effort or the time you put in, at least early on. And it's easy to think you can always be kind to yourself, but then you almost don't even recognize it creeping in when you're like, oh, I dropped the ball again by forgetting to respond to that email in time. And it's like, catch yourself beating yourself up about that, and then think about, how can I, like you said, make a structure where that doesn't happen again and I don't feel like that again.
Yeah.
And it's like building little rules. Like you said, yoga is almost a rule. Building those little rules for yourself.
Yeah.
Like if someone's booked to like come into the studio, I'm like, they're an hour early. But if like I know I have to do something at the studio, I'm like, oh, I can let that slide a little bit, you know? So yeah, that's important advice.
Oh, I hope it helps somebody.
Yeah. What would you say to someone who's just like a step or two behind you, who's developed but maybe doesn't know what the next thing is?
So I run my business based on intuition, and idealists are known for having good intuition, but we're only 15% of the population. And a lot of times I'll ask people, do you have good intuition? And they don't know. So if you don't know if you have good intuition, go ahead and think about something that's coming up and how do you think it's going to go? And once it's passed, look back and see if you got it right. And you'll find out if you have good intuition or not. But I don't recommend that people run their businesses based on intuition personally. But I do think that there's something to letting things unfold, that you only can control your actions. You can't control how the outcomes come out. And so if you're trying to force things too much, or you're grasping things too hard, I think that you're going to find yourself creating problems, or at least a lot of anxiety for yourself. And like I said, at the beginning, it feels so high stakes. And I get that. And I'm a worrier and a pre-worrier. But the truth is like regardless of how much you worry, things are still going to turn out somehow. And so you can do that if you want, or you can put some of that energy into something a little bit more healthy. Like I'm a worrier is never not going to be a worrier, but I always like people to balance it out. So if you're going to spend a certain amount of time worrying about something, it's like, okay, now it's the same part of your brain that can worry or can, play and vision. And it's like, okay, what if it turned out really great? What would that look like? But I think finding ways to manage that anxiety of being a new entrepreneur is probably pretty important.
I definitely relate to what you said about intuition, because there'll be like a new client or something, and there'll be something about the way they wrote an email where I'm like, that kind of rubbed me the wrong way, but I must be interpreting it wrong. And then 3 weeks later, I'm like, this is the worst client I've ever had in my entire life. And you start to actually trust that sense because you're like, it's never steered me wrong before, you know?
Right.
It always ends up being right if you've got a strong one. Yeah, us ins.
That's the thing, right? It's not everybody though. And I'm not, my intuition's not perfect. It's right about 95% of the time though. And I know where I'm going to be wrong. It's going to be old family stuff that's going to be wrong. But
What do you mean by that?
So my intuition, I'm usually right about what I think is going to happen unless my family's involved. And then it's like, maybe not. But business wise, it's served me really well. It's like, should I do this thing? It's like, well, let's move in this direction. And I'm going based on, so idealists are NFs, intuitive feelers, and I'm going based on feelings. We also have a lot of extra feelings though, which makes us worry a little bit more. But one of the things over time that you learn as you understand more about how your brain works and how you work is that even when you don't feel okay, you are okay. And the more experience you have to see that, oh, it all turns out okay. Somehow it always works out. Then I think that anxiety comes down. I just think it's hard early on for people to manage some of that anxiety.
Those extra feelings you were talking about. Like, I think that's part of the self-kindness problem, which is I'm projecting extra feelings onto that email that if I were to neutralize that, like you said, it's just like, boom, respond to the email. But instead, I've created this whole narrative of like, that person's mad at me, even though like they haven't even thought about it, and all those things that you would just add all this emotional weight to certain small tasks that really don't need to be there. Asking that question, like, what would this task look like if it was easy and simple? That's really helped me a lot. Where instead of playing out all the million ways that the email could go wrong, just like, well, what would it look like if I wrote this and it was just very easy? And do that.
That's great.
Yeah, that one's helped me. So what trait do you recognize repeatedly in the quote unquote successful people you've experienced in life?
Well, this has actually been studied. So one of the things that I learned about successful people is that successful people do just enough. And to anybody who's a perfectionist or a recovering perfectionist like me, that is horrifying. Why do just enough when you can overdo? So I think that that's really important to understand, is that it's like you've got your goals, and as soon as you're hitting those and you feel satisfaction coming up, move on to the next thing. Perfectionism is a real trap for never feeling successful. So if you can get into that habit of, have I done this well enough? Because I think high performers want to perform at the highest peak of performance all the time. And statistically speaking, that's just not where your performance is going to be every day. It's not going to be at its pinnacle every day, right? And so your 80% is probably good enough. And your 60% on some days is just showing up some days is probably good enough. So not thinking that success means that everything's done perfectly all the time. The thing that I've seen, and I've only seen this a couple times, but the thing that I've seen with clients who don't perform well in coaching or perform better with the coaching are people who kind of keep themselves in a victim space. And, like life just happens to them. Those folks tend not to be successful. So if you find yourself jumping on the drama triangle in the corner of a victim, get yourself out of there. I talk a lot about 100% responsibility with my clients. It's like the only thing you control in life is you and your actions, your responses, the meaning you make of the events in your life. That is it. So that setup that says, I'll be okay when this other person acts right, it's like you don't control them. You have zero control over them, and now you just gave all your power away. So any setup that says, I'll be okay when this other thing happens that's outside of my control, it's like, go ahead and reframe that. Just reframe that, because you control your actions. And kind of like what you were saying before, right? Those small steps add up. It's like, if you can keep taking small steps in the right direction for you, then I think you're going to be able to meet your goals and you're going to feel successful.
What's that book? I forget the name of it in the author, where she has to ask kind of 4 questions about a scenario. I think she calls it doing the work.
Is this Byron Katie?
Yeah.
Okay.
What's that book called?
I don't know.
Can I Google it real quick?
Sure. I like Byron Katie. She asked one question, I think, that really she's built her whole career around it. And is it real is the question. Is that real?
That's what I was trying to get to. What book is it? Loving What Is.
Okay.
I don't know why her Wikipedia had it buried so deep. Yeah, Loving What Is. She has that question, is this real or not? Yeah. But there was one thing that stood out in those questions that helped me, and it's like switching like what you think. Like, say your significant other, this is just a random example, your significant other hasn't done the dishes or something. Mm-hmm. You can catch yourself being like angry somehow about that.
Yeah.
And then she'll have you flip it to be like, my significant other shouldn't do the dishes. And if you just kind of if your brain says that, the weight of it's gone. And it's like, oh yeah, they shouldn't do that because they didn't. And it doesn't even really make sense me saying it, but it's like, oh yeah, that person should have cut me off because of that's how they're doing their day or whatever. It just takes it off of you.
Yeah.
And it's like, that is what happened. And now I'm going to do whatever I do about it. I might have to cut that. I don't know if that made any sense, but.
Well, what I would use to that is I would use the word maybe. So if we say, oh, my significant other should have washed the dishes. Maybe they should. Maybe they shouldn't. I don't know. Maybe,
yeah.
Okay. But maybe has helped me a lot about when it comes to shoulds.
Yeah.
You haven't asked me about my favorite book yet.
Oh, we're getting there. Speaking of Byron Katie, see, there's the segue. A couple questions. What book do you gift the most?
The book I gift the most and the book I recommend the most is the same. It's The 4 Agreements by Don Miguel Ruiz. There's now an empire built on that book, but the original book, The 4 Agreements, is the book that I recommend the most. And if you need a kind of a crash course in how to be an adult, good book. It's a really good book. There's so many skills that I find myself teaching my clients, whether they're executive clients or career coaching clients. And it's stuff that they should be teaching us in school and nobody does. Like, how do you work a boundary? Or manager, they promote people and they don't teach them how to give feedback. But they never taught us how to listen, so there's so many things that we should have been taught in order to be adults. But The 4 Agreements is really simple. I remember reading it and I kind of threw it on the pile. I'm like, whatever, weird opening. Okay. And then I started seeing them. And first I started seeing them in meetings I was in, and I started seeing them in other people. I'm like, oh, they're taking that personally. That's agreement 2. And, or they're making assumptions, agreement 3. And then I could start to see them in myself. And the first agreement is be impeccable with your word. So we don't use the word against other people or ourselves. And boy, did I use the word against myself. I was judging myself all the time. And then the final agreement, and we kind of talked about this one a little bit, is always do your best. But it's with the understanding that your best is wildly different from day to day. It's like, did you sleep well? Did you get to eat something? Do you have a sick kid at home? So those 4 little agreements, when you can start applying them to your life, they're really powerful.
They sound so broad, like they don't have much weight, I feel like, outside of the book. But they definitely, if you start to incorporate that, not taking anything personally, it sort of goes back to the Byron Katie idea too, and the victim, getting out of the victim mindset. Like, if you can not take stuff personally, it's like a superpower.
And not make assumptions. So let's say somebody does cut you off in traffic, and it's like, oh, they're a terrible driver and they're selfish, and maybe they're late for a job interview.
Yeah.
Because they have a sick kid at home. The truth is the answer is maybe, and you don't know.
Yeah.
So if you have an assumption, it's like they say, ask questions for clarity. And if you can't ask questions, it's like, just tell yourself maybe and keep going with your day. Because it's not about you. Don't take it personal, right?
It's like there's that old story of like a woman who buys a thing of cookies in the airport, and she's like got them beside her, and this man just like starts eating them, and he's just smiling, and she's like, I can't believe this guy's like eating my cookies. And so like, she's eating some too. And she's like, doesn't say anything, but she's just like so pissed at this guy. And then when she gets on the plane, she sees her bag of cookies is in her purse. And she was the one eating his cookies, but she was so mad at him. And I think that's what happens a lot in life is we're projecting these whole things on people. And in reality, maybe it's kind of us.
Yeah.
It's not to excuse other people's bad behavior. And like you said, got to set boundaries. But yeah, if you can kind of start to free yourself of that, I feel like I've found that meditation, at least getting used to like what peace feels like and knowing that's what my breathing, that's what my heart rate, it's kind of what my adrenaline level feels like. Knowing that, then you can catch when those things spike and go kind of wild when someone cuts you off. And it's almost like instead of it happening to you, you're recognizing it and seeing it from a bird's eye view.
Yeah, I think meditation is a great practice. And I would say that if somebody wants to try it, your perfectionist definitely needs to stay at home for that. And it doesn't have to look perfect. I like the book 10% Happier about meditation. It's by Dan Harris. And he kind of shows you what his meditations looked like early on, and his brain was going crazy and he's like, oh, a bird, So don't think that you're going to be a Zen master, right? That's why they say it's a practice. It's because it's not necessarily easy, but and you can experiment with how to do that too, right?
Yeah.
Some people like a guided meditation or music or to use walking, as a meditation. So you can find your own style, but I feel like we're raising generations of kids who don't know how to soothe themselves. And it's a high level kind of maturity skill that we all need. We all need to remember like, hey, it's my job as a mature adult to meet my own needs.
Yeah.
And meditation is a way that we can kind of train ourselves to do that.
Yeah. And for those of us who have brains that are wired for stimulation, it's like, okay, well, I've listened to a podcast in the shower, walking the dog, while I'm falling asleep. I've listened to some kind of stimulating thing all day from wake up to close. Like maybe I should take some time for some purposeful silence and let that be part of my day too. So yeah, it helps. To close, what are you excited about right now, Jen?
I'm excited about two things. During the pandemic, it's kind of hard to be excited about things.
Yeah.
Life is such a grind right now. And while I'm rehabbing this elbow, right, it's like work, exercise. But one thing I'm excited about is at the beginning of next month, I'm going to be meeting my sister in Arizona. We're going to go see my father and then my sister and I will be spending some time together, just the two of us. I haven't seen my family in a long time. And I haven't been anywhere since the pandemic began. And so I'm excited for the change of scenery. And from everything I keep reading, it's safe to get on a plane. So I figure, all right, get my mask, gonna do this thing, and then I'm just going to be as careful as possible while in Arizona. We'll be outside a lot, is my hope. But that change of scenery is really powerful. And I don't think I've really taken just some time away for a year now. And I know the last time I went away, I was like, oh, I have to do that more. And then I broke the elbow like 2 weeks later. And so I haven't really done any of that. If you haven't had a change of scenery, just think about what you could possibly do, even if it's just going to a local park or, anything you can find that feels safe to you. But a change of scenery is important, especially for those of us who have our own businesses. And a lot of us work from home and it's the same four walls all the time. And, they say for people who are creative that there's nothing that will boost your creativity more than a change of scenery. Yeah. So I'm excited about that. And the other thing I'm excited about is I'm starting to work in a project with some other coaches. And I've done this before in the past. And as an entrepreneur, I don't have colleagues every day. There's no water cooler, right? I don't go anywhere all the time for work. And I have clients, so I'm with people, but I don't have colleagues that I'm with all the time. So I'm going to be working on a project with 4 other coaches as we move a big cohort of people through training and then individual one-on-one coaching. And I'm excited about that. I remember the last time we did this, we were meeting, I think we met at the library, and there were like 5 or 6 of us. And I was like, I'm just so excited to have a meeting, which, right, people hate meetings. But when you're an entrepreneur, other than client meetings, you don't have meetings.
Yeah.
So it's kind of fun. And it's fun to, geek out with other people who are interested in the same stuff as you. So I find that that's exciting too.
Yeah. I had my podcast producer mastermind Zoom call this morning before us recording this. And same thing. I'm like, I don't know any other podcast producers in person, so I have to call them in from all across the country. But yeah, that's exciting.
It is.
Yeah. Especially in the pandemic. You're like, oh, people.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. camaraderie is one of my values, so that stuff's important. And I know playfulness is one of yours, right?
Yeah, play is one of my values. And for me, what that means is what can we do that's fun and interesting together?
Yeah. And I feel like the change of scenery plays into play a lot too.
Yes.
Yeah.
For sure.
I'm right there with you. I sometimes thought that like adventure was one of my values, but I think it's more of just that stimulation of new things, that whether it's in town or not, sort of mini adventures. I digress. Jen, thank you so much. Is there anything else we didn't hit that you wanted to?
No, I feel like this was a very wide-ranging but thorough conversation.
It was, yeah. We're at an hour and 9 minutes, so I think we covered everything I wanted to cover. This is like my favorite stuff to talk about, and you're like a deep, deep library on this stuff. So thank you so much for doing this and for all you've taught me. And where can people find you and keep up with you?
So I have a website. It's jenfrankcoaching.com, and I'm on LinkedIn. And, I always encourage people, if you're wondering about coaching and could it help you, it's like, reach out to me. For a while, I was posting a lot on LinkedIn too, and I'm hoping to get back to that. So, get in touch if you have questions about coaching. I always like to talk to people too who are thinking about becoming coaches.
Oh, cool.
And it's neat to see who wants to come into the field, because everybody who becomes a coach, right, they're bringing their own gifts and skills and strengths. And I encourage my clients, I'm like, hey, if you want to work with somebody else down the road, do it, because they're going to bring their own stuff to it. But yeah, I hope that somebody will reach out to me.
Yeah. And would you say for people to reach out to you, your main specialty is career coaching, or what? How do you define it?
I do a lot of career coaching and I do a lot of executive coaching.
Okay.
But everything I'm doing is like personal and professional development. And it's really about people being the leaders of their own lives and careers. So whatever that looks like for you. So you feel like you're in purposeful work and you're performing at the level that you want to perform at.
Consider me a devotee. Did I say that right?
Yeah.
Yes, but thank you for all your help, Jen. And now it's time for us to feed the baby squirrel that we have in the studio.
Baby squirrel.
Yes, we found a baby squirrel, and I've been more or less breastfeeding it every 3 hours. So like you were saying, how you broke your arm and it became a habit.
Yep.
Feeding this baby squirrel the past 2 weeks has become a habit and routine in my life now.
I can't imagine getting up in the middle of the night to feed the baby squirrel every 3 hours. That is devotion.
Yes, he's so cute though. Little Alvin. My girlfriend's a teacher and her class named him Alvin. So, although he's not a chipmunk.
It close enough.
Close
it's
enough.
all good.
Yes.
It's all good. Well, thanks for having me, Alec. I really enjoyed it.
Thank you, Jen. And thank you all for listening. This is the first episode back, so if you made it this far, I love you guys. Down in the show notes, you'll find a link to my Hit the Ground Running newsletter. It's basically a HIT. It's like habit, idea, and tactic that I send every Monday, and it helps creative entrepreneurs with ADHD just kind of, hit the ground running every Monday. It's a nice boost. So if you want a hit of that, just go down in the show notes and you'll find the link in the link tree there. Also, if you enjoyed the show, the best thing you can do is share it with a friend. If you guys know a creative entrepreneur with ADHD who might benefit from this stuff, go ahead and share it with them. And if you feel like it, leave a rating and review and follow us on Apple. That helps with the algorithms. And last but not least, check out our Patreon. I'm going to be doing a happy hour live in there every week. So if you want to join, please do. And we'll have a bunch of resources in there for people like you to keep you growing. But I love you guys and thank you for listening. Peace.